padlock clicked shut at exactly 8:15 in the evening, the same as it had every night for 11 months. Maya Whitfield lay on the metal cot closest to the east wall and listened to the sound of Warren Braddock's boots crunching across the gravel path back toward the farmhouse. She counted the steps, 27 from the barn door to the porch. She had memorized that number the way other 9-year-old girls memorize the lyrics to pop songs or the names of characters in cartoons. 27 steps meant he was gone. 27 steps meant the night had officially begun. The barn was 60 feet long and 40 feet wide. One door, no windows. A single 40-watt bulb hung from the ceiling, rafter left on until 10, then switched off from the breaker box inside the farmhouse. 5 metal frame cots lined the east wall, each spaced exactly 4 feet apart. The spacing was deliberate. Close enough to monitor, far enough to prevent whispering without being heard through the barn walls on a quiet night. Maya could hear the others breathing. Becca, 10 years old, red hair, a scar on her chin, from the night she fell off her cot during a nightmare, and Warren decided the noise warranted correction. Becca breathed in short, shallow pulls, the rhythm of someone whose ribs remembered impact. Next to her, Elias, 8, dark-haired, silent. Elias had stopped speaking 14 days after arriving at the Braddock farm. That was 6 months ago. He communicated now in gestures, nods, the occasional written word on scraps of paper he hid inside his pillowcase. Beyond Elias, the twins, Marcus and David, 10 and 11 brothers, by blood separated from their mother when she went to prison, reunited here in this barn that smelled of old hay and rust and something sour that none of them could name, but all of them recognized as the particular scent of a place where living things are stored instead of sheltered. And at the far end, Sophie, 6 years old, the youngest, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. Sophie still cried at night, quietly into the rabbit, muffling the sound because she had learned in her first week that crying above a certain volume produced consequences. Maya stared at the ceiling. The wood planks were rough-cut pine, darkened with age, and if she stared long enough, the grain patterns became maps. She had traced those maps 100 times. Escape routes that existed only in the wood above her head. Tonight, though, she was not tracing maps. She was calculating. 3 Sundays. She had been watching for 3 consecutive Sundays at the Rusty Spur Diner on Old Route 60, the only time Warren and Lorraine took the children off the property, the weekly performance of normalcy designed to maintain the illusion. Church in the morning, lunch at the diner, home by 2:30. The routine was precise because Warren Braddock was a precise man. He understood that consistency was the architecture of believability. A family that appeared every Sunday at the same diner, same booth, same polite interactions with the waitress, same carefully rehearsed answers from the children. If anyone asked how they were doing, that family became wallpaper, invisible through repetition. But Maya had found the gap, the 5-minute window. Every Sunday, Warren left the booth to pay at the register. Lorraine excused herself to the restroom. 5 minutes, sometimes less, when no adult eye was directly on Maya. She had measured it across 3 Sundays with the patient precision of someone for whom precision was the difference between another week in the barn and something else. Something she could not yet name but felt in the hollow space beneath her ribs, where hope used to live before it learned to hide. The problem was the man in booth 8. He was not always there. The first Sunday, the booth had been empty. The second Sunday, an elderly couple had occupied it, eating slowly, talking about their grandchildren. The third Sunday, he appeared. Enormous, 6'5" at least, a beard that reached the middle of his chest, salt and pepper, the kind of beard that took years to grow and a particular kind of man to maintain. He wore a black leather vest covered in patches that Maya did not understand, but recognized as insignia symbols of belonging to something larger than one person. Wire-rimmed reading glasses perched on his nose, a folded newspaper open to the crossword, hands the size of dinner plates wrapped around a coffee mug that looked like a thimble in his grip. Most of the customers who entered the Rusty Spur and saw him in booth 8 chose to sit on the opposite side of the restaurant. Maya had watched a woman with 2 small children pause at the entrance, register his presence, and steer her family toward the counter, stools near the kitchen. The message was clear. The man in the leather vest was someone to avoid. But Maya Whitfield had learned something in her 11 months at the Braddock farm that most 9-year-olds never have reason to learn. The adults who smile the widest and speak the warmest are not always the safest. And the ones who look the most frightening sometimes carry the gentlest hands. Warren Braddock smiled constantly. His voice was honeyed measured the practiced drawl of a man who had spent years calibrating his public persona to a frequency that made social workers relax their clipboards and judges nod approvingly from the bench. He had won Potter County's Foster Parent of the Year award in 2021. The plaque hung beside the front door of the farmhouse next to the American flag and a hand-painted sign that read, "Welcome to Braddock Heritage Farms." Behind that door, behind that smile, Warren Braddock locked 5 children in a livestock barn every night from 8:15 until 4:30 in the morning. He rationed their food to amounts calculated to keep them functional but compliant. He tied their wrists with barn rope when they failed to complete the chore schedule he had laminated and posted on the barn wall, a schedule that ran from 4:30 in the morning until 7:30 at night and covered every minute of a child's waking life with labor designed to exhaust the body and silence the mind. Maya knew all of this. She had lived all of this for 11 months. What she had not known, not until 7 weeks ago, was that Warren Braddock had done this before, and that the child before her had not survived. She had been in the farmhouse kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon in July, refilling the water pitchers for the evening meal, moving quietly because quietness was survival and sound was risk. Warren was in his office down the hall. The door was half open. He was on the phone and his voice had dropped into a register Maya had never heard him use, lower flatter stripped of the performance warmth. The voice of a man conducting business he did not want overheard. The policy clears October 14th. Same process as last time. No complications. A pause. Then Warren again. He was worth more dead. That was the arrangement. This one is the same. Maya had frozen in the kitchen doorway. The water pitcher trembled in her hands. She did not fully understand what she had heard. She was 9 years old and the language of insurance fraud and premeditated harm was not part of her vocabulary. But she understood tone. She understood the word dead. And she understood that same process as last time meant there had been a last time. Tommy Slade. The name surfaced from the place where Maya kept the things the other children whispered about when the lights went out. Tommy had been here before Maya arrived. 6 years old, brown hair, quiet like Elias was quiet now. He had been at the Braddock farm for 9 months, and then one morning in October 2021, he was not there anymore. Becca had told Maya the story in fragments, whispered across the 4-foot gap between their cots, on nights when Warren's boots had faded past the 27-step mark, and the only sound was Sophie's muffled crying and the wind pressing against the barn walls. Tommy got sick, real sick. Lorraine said it was the flu, but she did not take him to a doctor. She just kept him in the barn. Warren told the social worker he was recovering. Then one night, Tommy could not breathe right. We could hear it. That sound like something wet and heavy in his chest. Becca had paused. We heard it stop. The breathing. Around 2 in the morning. Warren came with a flashlight, took him out. We never saw Tommy again. Maya had listened to Becca's whispered account and filed it in the place she kept the most dangerous information, the facts that could not be unknowing the knowledge that changed the shape of everything around it. Tommy Slade had died in this barn. Warren Braddock had received money. And now standing in the farmhouse kitchen with a water pitcher shaking in her hands, Maya understood, with the particular clarity of a child who has been forced to think like an adult, that the phrase "this one is the same" meant her. She was worth more dead. That was the night Maya Whitfield began planning. Not escape she had considered escape, 100 times measured the distances, the roads, the nearest house 4 miles across open ranch land with no cover and no shoes that fit. Escape was a fantasy for children who had somewhere to run. Maya had nowhere. Instead, she planned communication, a message, something that could travel the distance she could not, something small enough to create in seconds, clear enough to be understood by a stranger, and targeted at exactly the right person. Someone who would not call Warren, would not file a report that disappeared into a drawer, would not smile warmly and tell her everything would be fine and then drive away. She had tried twice before. 2 attempts that had failed so completely, they had taught her more about the system designed to protect her than 11 months of living inside its failure. The first attempt was in March, a Sunday at First Baptist Church of Canyon, where Warren served as a deacon, and the congregation knew him as a man of deep faith and generous spirit. During the offering, while heads were bowed and eyes were closed, Maya had placed a folded piece of paper into the collection basket. She had written it the night before on a scrap torn from the chore schedule, using a pencil stub she had hidden inside her mattress. The note read, "Please help us. We live on the farm. He hurts us. Please, The collection basket traveled from row to row, was gathered by an usher, and was delivered to the church office. Pastor Greer, 64 years old, silver-haired, the kind of man whose Sunday sermons emphasized community and accountability in the sacred duty of caring for the vulnerable, found the note while counting the offering that afternoon. He called Warren Braddock. The call lasted 4 minutes. Warren explained that Maya was a troubled child recently placed carrying significant behavioral and emotional damage from her biological home. He spoke with the patient sorrow of a man burdened by the difficulty of caring for damaged children. Pastor Greer listened, sympathized, and asked if there was anything the church could do to support the family. Warren thanked him, declined, and hung up. That night, Maya learned what the consequences of communication look like when the recipient chose the wrong side. Warren did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. He simply removed her mattress from the cot, replacing it with bare metal slats. He shortened her food ration by half for 2 weeks. And he told her in the flat, measured tone she had come to fear more than shouting, that if she ever tried something like that again, Sophie would be the one who paid for it. Maya did not sleep on metal slats and think about giving up. She slept on metal slats and thought about what she had done wrong. The error was not the attempt. The error was the target. She had sent a message to someone inside Warren's circle of trust, someone whose social relationship with Warren outweighed a stranger child's handwritten plea. The pastor had chosen the man he knew over the child he did not. The second attempt came in May. Patricia Fenn, the assigned caseworker from Potter County CPS, conducted a scheduled home visit. Scheduled being the operative word. Warren had 72 hours notice. Enough time to unlock the barn, move the cots to the storage shed, replace them with sleeping bags and stuffed animals, stock the refrigerator with food. The children were not permitted to eat, and coach each child on the answers to anticipated questions. Maya had deviated from the script. When Patricia Fenn asked her with practiced professional warmth how she was settling in, Maya had pulled up her sleeve and shown her the rope burns on her right wrist. Patricia Fenn had looked at the marks. She had written something on her clipboard. And then she had asked Warren, who was standing 3 feet away, to explain. Warren's response was immediate, rehearsed, delivered with a precise mixture of concern and resignation that a loving foster parent might display when confronted with evidence of a child's self-destructive behavior. Maya has a history of self-harm. It is in her intake file. We have been working with her on it. It is heartbreaking, honestly. We do everything we can. Patricia Fenn had nodded. She documented the rope burns as self-inflicted. She closed the inquiry within 48 hours, and on the following Christmas, she received a $50 gift card from the Braddock family, a small token of appreciation for her dedicated service, delivered with warm cookies and a handwritten note from Lorraine. Maya had filed this second failure beside the first. 2 attempts, 2 adults, 2 betrayals. The pastor chose loyalty to Warren. The caseworker chose convenience. Both chose the story that cost them the least. Both chose to believe the adult who had practiced his answers over the child who was showing her wounds. There would not be a third failure. The next attempt would be different. It would target someone outside Warren's network, someone with no social obligation to believe him, someone whose appearance alone suggested they operated by a different set of rules than the pastors and caseworkers and deputies who had built the invisible architecture of Warren Braddock's protection. The man in booth 8. Maya had watched him for 23 minutes before the window opened. She had cataloged everything. He was alone. He spoke to no one. The waitress, a woman named Jolene with kind eyes and tired feet, brought him coffee and food without small talk, the routine of familiarity between a regular customer and the staff who knew his order by heart. He read his newspaper slowly, methodically, as though time were a resource he had in abundance and intended to spend carefully. His leather vest was worn soft with years of use, and the patches on it bore symbols that Maya associated with motorcycles and the kind of men her mother's sister had once warned her about. Dangerous men, her aunt had said, though her aunt had never met one and was forming her opinion from television dramas and local news reports. But Maya was not forming opinions from television. She was forming them from 11 months of direct observation of human behavior under conditions that stripped away every polite fiction adults used to obscure their true nature. She had watched Warren Braddock charm 3 separate PS investigators. She had watched Pastor Greer destroy her only written plea for help. She had watched Patricia Fenn convert physical evidence of abuse into documentation of self-harm. She had watched Deputy Wade Simmons Warren's neighbor drive up to the farm's access road on two separate occasions in response to anonymous complaints, sit in his cruiser for 4 minutes and drive away without ever exiting the vehicle. The man in booth 8 had none of the markers that Maya had learned to associate with danger. He did not smile at strangers. He did not perform warmth. He did not adjust his behavior to accommodate the comfort of the people around him. He simply existed large and unadorned and entirely himself, and there was something in that plainness that Maya's exhausted instincts recognized as a form of honesty. She would give him the message. If he ignored it, she would be no worse than she already was. If he reported it to Warren, she would suffer the consequences. But if he was what her instinct was telling her, he might be someone who saw the world without the comfortable filters that allowed good people to look past broken children, then maybe for the first time in 11 months, the right person would receive the right message at the right moment. The man in booth 8 was Hank Dawson. Most people knew him as Grizzly. He had earned the name 26 years ago during a bar fight in Lubbock that lasted 40 seconds and ended with two men on the floor and Grizzly standing over them with a split lip and an expression of mild inconvenience. The name stuck because it fit not just the physical dimensions of a man who stood 6'5" and weighed 287 pounds, but something about his temperament, the slow, deliberate quality of a creature that preferred to be left alone but was not to be tested. Grizzly had spent 22 years as a combat medic, 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, 6 years at military hospitals stateside. He had treated gunshot wounds, blast injuries, burns, broken bones, and the particular kind of psychological damage that came from watching young men die in places whose names most Americans would never learn to pronounce. He had earned a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, and a medical discharge that came with a prescription for medication he had never filled because he had learned long ago that the things he carried could not be dissolved by chemistry. They could only be managed by purpose. After the military, Grizzly had found purpose in the most unlikely of places. The Hells Angels Panhandle, chapter based on the industrial edge of Amarillo, operating out of a converted warehouse with a parking lot that could accommodate 200 bikes and a reputation that made most law-abiding citizens cross to the other side of the street. He had joined at 41, older than most prospects, and had risen to a position of quiet authority that had less to do with rank and more to do with the particular respect afforded to a man who had spent 2 decades keeping people alive under conditions designed to kill them. But the event that had truly shaped Grizzly into the man sitting in booth 8 on this particular Sunday was not a war. It was a custody battle. His daughter Renee had struggled with addiction since her early 20s. Pills first, then harder things, then the slow spiral that ended in a courtroom where a judge determined that Renee's daughter Lily, born in 2019, could no longer safely remain in her mother's care. Lily was placed in emergency foster custody. She was 2 years old. Grizzly had spent the next 14 months fighting to bring Lily home. Every form, every hearing, every 7 in the morning phone call to a caseworker's desk that was never answered before 9 and never returned before 5. He had navigated a system designed for people with law's degrees and unlimited patience, armed with neither fueled entirely by the refusal to let his granddaughter become a number in a filing cabinet. Lily came home. Grizzly had won. But the 14 months he spent inside that system had shown him something he could not unsee. The children who did not have a grandfather willing to call the same unanswered number 400 times. The children whose files sat in stacks on desks that were understaffed and overloaded. The children who fell through gaps that were not gaps at all, but permanent structural features of a system that processed human beings like paperwork because paperwork was easier to manage than pain. Grizzly had carried that knowledge for 3 years. It sat beside the other things he carried: the war, the faces, the sounds that surfaced at 2 in the morning when the house was too quiet, and it had become a kind of vigilance. Not paranoia, not the hyper-awareness of a man expecting danger around every corner. Something quieter, a refusal to stop seeing. A commitment to remaining present in the ordinary moments that most people move through without looking, because he had learned in field hospitals and family courts, in the long silence of the Texas Panhandle, that the moments that mattered most were the ones that looked from the outside like nothing at all. So when a 9-year-old girl walked into the Rusty Spur Diner on a Sunday afternoon in August wearing long white thermal sleeves despite 97-degree heat, Grizzly noticed. He did not look at her directly. He had spent 22 years as a medic and understood that direct attention could be a form of pressure, that frightened people, especially frightened children, responded better to peripheral awareness than to the full weight of an adult's gaze. He kept his eyes on his newspaper and let his training do the work. The girl's gait was wrong, too slow for her age, too careful, the shuffle of someone conserving energy they did not have. Her arms were pressed flat against her sides, held there deliberately, the posture of concealment. Her sundress was 3 sizes too large, safety pinned at both straps dragging the floor. Her white shoes were 2 sizes too small, cutting red rings into her ankles. She sat at the outer edge of booth 7, not the middle, not the inner wall, the outer edge, the escape position, the place a person sits when they have already calculated the distance to the nearest exit and want to minimize it. The man she was with, tall rancher build, easy smile, the weathered handsomeness of a man who spent time outdoors and knew how to wear it, sat at the inner wall, comfortable, possessive, the posture of ownership. A woman sat beside him, soft-featured, maternal presentation, the kind of woman whose appearance in a church pew or a PTA meeting would generate immediate trust. Grizzly read his newspaper and counted. The food arrived. The girl did not eat. Her plate sat untouched for the entire meal. The man and the woman ate normally, spoke to each other in the low, comfortable tones of a couple performing routine. Neither acknowledged that the child at their table had not taken a single bite. A sleeve slipped. The girl reached for her water glass and the thermal fabric shifted 2 inches above her right wrist. Grizzly saw it in his peripheral vision. A pale, waxy line circling the wrist. Rope burn, 3 weeks old. The specific width and texture of barn tie-down cord, quarter-inch braided nylon, the kind sold at every farm supply store within 100 miles. He knew that mark. He had seen it on prisoners of war. The woman Lorraine the man had called her placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. The child went perfectly still, not relaxed, not comforted. The particular frozen stillness of a body that has learned that motionlessness is protection. The stillness of a rabbit in an open field when it hears a hawk's shadow cross the grass. Grizzly turned a page of his newspaper. His hands were steady. His mind was not. It was running the assessment he had performed thousands of times in 22 years of combat medicine, the rapid triage of observable symptoms against the probability of underlying injury. Untouched food, full plate, nothing moved. Bruise at the right temple, 11 days old. The yellow-green of late-stage healing, fading but unmistakable to a trained eye. A thin scar on her lower lip, healed without stitches. The kind of wound that happens when a face meets something hard and no one takes the child to a doctor afterward. Long sleeves on a day when the asphalt outside shimmered in visible heat waves. Weight approximately 40 pounds. Roughly 23 pounds below expected for a child her height and apparent age. And the rope burn, that specific detail. Because rope burns on the wrists of a 9-year-old girl in a farming community in the Texas Panhandle were not the product of play or accident or the rough and tumble of rural childhood. They were the product of restraint, of binding, of someone tying a child's wrists with the same cord they used to secure livestock. Something was wrong. Grizzly had been a medic long enough to know that the details his conscious mind had not finished cataloging were usually the ones that mattered most. The instinct that something was wrong was not irrational. It was the result of years of pattern recognition operating faster than conscious thought. Trust the instinct. That was the first rule of triage. The body sees what the mind has not yet processed. Trust it. He kept reading his newspaper. He waited. Because he also knew from those same 22 years that acting on instinct without information was how medics got themselves and their patients killed. He needed more. He needed the child to tell him. He did not know she was already planning to. The window opened at 2:19 in the afternoon. Warren Braddock stood from the booth, buttoned his shirt cuff with the mechanical precision of a man who dressed deliberately and walked toward the register with his wallet already out. That easy rancher's smile settled onto his face like a mask he had worn so often it had become indistinguishable from his actual features. Lorraine excused herself toward the restroom hallway. Be right back, sugar. The words directed at Maya but meant for no one. A performance of affection for the benefit of anyone within earshot. 8 seconds. Maya had 8 seconds before Lorraine's reflection would become visible in the hallway mirror, signaling her return. 8 seconds to execute the plan she had rehearsed in her head every night for 3 weeks, lying on a metal cot in a locked barn, staring at ceiling planks and tracing escape routes in the wood grain. Her right hand moved beneath the table. Slow, practiced. The broken red crayon she had palmed from the hostess stand on the way in shifted from her left hand to her right fingers. She had selected red deliberately. Red was the color of emergency. Red was the color that said, this is not a game. She pulled the paper placemat toward her. The crayon moved. A rectangle. Vertical lines inside it. A cage. Below it, 3 block letters in a 9-year-old's careful print. SOS. She slid the placemat across the 4 feet of linoleum floor, between booth 7 and booth 8. It came to rest against Grizzly's left boot. He looked down. The cage. The letters, the red crayon still visible in the girl's hand beneath the table. He set down his newspaper, removed his reading glasses, picked up the placemat. He looked at Maya for the first time. She was staring straight ahead, hands back in her lap as though the action had been performed by someone else. A ghost. An invisible version of herself that could do the things the visible version was too frightened to attempt. Are you safe, little one? The question was quiet enough that only she could hear it. His voice, despite coming from a man who weighed 287 pounds and whose hands could palm a basketball, had the particular gentleness of someone who had spent 2 decades asking frightened people questions they needed to answer truthfully. 4 seconds of silence. The longest 4 seconds of Maya Whitfield's life. Then the whisper, barely audible. The sound of a child using language like a last resource after every other option had been exhausted. He locks us in at night. 7 words. But one of them changed everything Grizzly thought he was dealing with. Us, how many? His voice stayed quiet, steady, the tone he had used in field hospitals when he needed information fast but could not afford to frighten the source. Maya's left hand moved slowly to her right sleeve. She pulled it up 3 inches. Rope burns on both wrists, pale, raised, the waxy texture of skin that had been abraded repeatedly by something rough and unforgiving. She did not look at them. She looked at Grizzly. There are 4 others, 5 words. The longest sentence she had formed in months. She reached for the placemat, took the broken crayon back, turned the paper over. Her hand moved. Careful block letters. The writing of a child who had been practicing this in her head for weeks. Barn. No door open at night. No food today. She set the crayon down. 3 seconds. She looked toward the register. Warren's back was visible, still at the counter, handing cash to the cashier. Maya turned back to Grizzly. I heard him on the phone. He said, I am worth more dead. He said, okay. 22 words. Her most sustained speech in 11 months. Each word placed with the precision of someone who understood that language was a finite resource and could not be wasted. Then she added the name that changed everything. Tommy, the boy before me. He died last year. Warren got money. Her voice was still a whisper, but the words were clear. Factual. The flat delivery of a child reporting something she had overheard and memorized without fully understanding the implications. She did not need to understand the implications. She needed someone else to understand them for her. Grizzly looked at the placemat, the cage, the rope burns, the hollowed-out face of a 9-year-old who weighed 41 pounds. He looked at the register. Warren finishing his transaction. He looked at the restroom hallway. Lorraine's reflection not yet visible. He had maybe 90 seconds before the window closed. He set the placemat face down on his table and covered it with his hand, securing the evidence, removing it from sight. His mind was running the calculation that every medic learns to perform in the space between recognizing a crisis and acting on it. What do I have? What do I need? What can go wrong? What happens if I do nothing? He looked at Maya. Maya, he used her name, made it gentle, made it certain. I am not leaving this seat until you are safe. I am going to make one phone call. When I do, there will be motorcycles in this parking lot. A lot of them. And not one of them is leaving until all 5 of you are out of that barn. He held out his right hand, palm up, open, not reaching, not demanding, An offering. That is a medic's word. I do not break those. Maya looked at his hand for 3 seconds. The hand of a man whose knuckles were scarred and whose fingers were thick as rope and whose palm was wide enough to hold both of hers with room to spare. She placed her small hand in his. Not a handshake. A hold. The first time she had voluntarily touched an adult in 11 months. The first time in 11 months that touching an adult had felt like safety instead of danger. What Maya did not know, what she could not have known, was that the hand she was holding belonged to a man who had spent 14 months fighting a system that processed children like cargo. A man who had brought his granddaughter home and then spent 3 years unable to stop thinking about the ones who had no one to fight for them. A man who had been waiting for this moment without knowing it would arrive in the form of a 9-year-old girl with a broken red crayon and 8 seconds of borrowed time. Grizzly pulled his phone from his vest pocket with his free hand. His eyes stayed on Warren at the register. He dialed a number he knew by heart. One ring. Reaper. The voice on the other end was gravel and diesel. Jace Colton, a man who had spent 12 years as an Army Ranger before finding his way to the same stretch of Texas highway and the same leather vest and the same understanding that brotherhood was not a word but a verb. Reaper, it is Grizzly. Child abuse situation. I need every brother within 50 miles at the Rusty Spur Diner on Old Route 60. Right now, silence on the line. Not hesitation. Calculation. The particular silence of a man assessing operational parameters. How bad, 9 years old. 40 pounds, rope burns on both wrists, 5 kids total. Foster placement. He locks them in a barn at night. Previous child named Tommy died last year. Life insurance payout. This is not neglect. This is a killing operation. Another beat of silence. Then 2 words. We are rolling. The line went dead. That was it. No questions about proof, no concerns about legal complications, no debate about whether this was their business or someone else's jurisdiction. Just we are rolling because that was what brotherhood meant when a child's life was measured in weeks and the system designed to protect her had been converted into the instrument of her destruction. 23 miles east at the Hells Angels Panhandle Chapter Clubhouse. Jace Colton walked into the center of the yard where 44 brothers were gathered for their regular Sunday afternoon and spoke one sentence. Somebody hurt a kid. We ride. Ironside, 62 years old. Former Amarillo police homicide detective, 21 years on the force before he retired, stood without a word. Keys already in his hand. He had spent 2 decades investigating crimes against children. He did not need details. The sentence was enough. Ridge, the chapter's road captain, 58, gray-bearded, the kind of face that had been in the vicinity of serious decisions, checked his phone and began texting. Coordinating. Because a road captain's job was not to ask why. It was to make sure that when the chapter moved, it moved as a single body with a single purpose. Sparrow, the youngest at 34, tech specialist, former signals contractor, grabbed his helmet off the picnic table. He carried equipment in his saddlebags that most people associated with law enforcement, not motorcycle clubs. Documentation tools, evidence preservation protocols, chain of custody procedures. Because Sparrow had learned that the difference between justice and chaos was often the quality of the paperwork. Elder, 72 years old, the chapter's oldest active member, a combat medic from a war that most Americans had spent 50 years trying to forget, rose slowly from his chair. He did not ask where. He did not ask why. He did not need to. When Elder moved, everyone else understood that the situation had crossed a threshold that made questions irrelevant. Within 11 minutes, 45 motorcycles were on Old Route 60 heading west. The sound started as a low rumble, distant like thunder rolling across a horizon that had not seen rain in weeks. Then it grew. The particular resonance of 45 Harley-Davidson engines at highway speed, the sound of organized force moving with purpose toward a destination that had been identified and would not be abandoned until the mission was complete. Warren noticed the change before the sound arrived. The man in booth 8 was no longer reading his newspaper. He was facing booth 7. His body language had shifted from passive to planted, the posture of someone who had made a decision and intended to occupy that decision for as long as necessary. And he was holding Maya's hand. Warren's smile stayed in place. It was the smile he had used to navigate 3 CPS investigations, 2 anonymous complaints, a sheriff's wellness check, and 9 years of Sunday services where he shook the pastor's hand and asked about the sermon with the earnest attention of a man whose conscience was clear and whose heart was full of gratitude for the blessings of family. That smile had never failed him. He started walking toward booth 7, slow, unhurried, the gait of a man with nothing to worry about and all the time in the world. Lorraine rounded the corner from the restroom hallway at the same moment. She saw Warren approaching. She saw the man in booth 8. She saw Maya's hand. Her expression, soft and maternal and perfectly composed, flickered for less than a second before resettling into its default position. Grizzly saw them both converging. Warren from the left, Lorraine from the right. His free hand moved to his vest pocket, the small laminated card he carried every time he rode. His EMT and paramedic certification, current, valid, a legal shield, and a strategic instrument. Warren reached the booth. His smile was confident. Everything all right here. His voice was measured, polite, carrying the slight Texas drawl that made him sound like a concerned neighbor, asking about a borrowed lawnmower. Grizzly looked up, met his eyes. Your daughter is not feeling well. I am a paramedic, just making sure she is okay. Warren's smile did not waver, but his eyes moved, down to Maya's hand still held in Grizzly's, then back up to Grizzly's face. Appreciate your concern, but she is fine. Just a little shy. Come on, Maya. Time to head home. He reached for her shoulder. Grizzly did not release Maya's hand. She told me she does not feel safe. As a licensed medical professional, I am obligated to follow up when a minor reports feeling unsafe. The temperature in the booth dropped 10 degrees. Warren's smile held, but the edges were eroding. The mask losing structural integrity under pressure it had not been designed to withstand. I do not know what she told you, but she is a troubled child. She came to us with a lot of damage. These things take time. She told me you lock her in a barn at night, her and 4 other children. She showed me rope burns on both wrists. She told me about a boy named Tommy who died last year. Each sentence landed separately. Grizzly did not raise his voice. The information carried its own weight. Warren's face changed. The charm fell away like a costume he had forgotten he was wearing. What replaced it was colder. Harder the face beneath the face, the one that existed behind closed doors and padlocked barns. You have no legal authority here. She is my foster child. This is parental interference. Then call the police. Grizzly's hand stayed on Maya's. His voice stayed level. Let us all wait together. Outside, the sound arrived before the sight. That low rumble, growing. Jolene looked up from the service counter toward the front windows. The customers at the counter turned on their stools. The couple in the window booth stopped mid-conversation. Warren heard it too. His head turned toward the parking lot, and through the glass he saw them coming. Not one motorcycle, not 5, 45, in formation, 4 columns, staggered entry. The kind of synchronized riding that only happens when men have spent years on the road together, reading each other's movements the way musicians read a conductor's hands. They parked in rows, engines cutting off in sequence, the silence afterward, heavy and expectant, like the air before a thunderstorm, when the wind stops and the sky turns the color of a bruise. 45 men in leather vests stood beside their bikes, not moving, not shouting, not performing aggression or menace. They were simply present, occupying space, making it clear that the space they occupied was not going to be vacated until the situation inside that diner had been resolved. Warren Braddock looked through the window at 45 motorcycles and understood for the first time in 9 years that he was standing inside a room he could not talk his way out of. Jolene had been carrying something for the last 20 minutes. The weight of a near miss. She had passed Maya's booth 3 times during the meal. Each time she had noticed the untouched food, the long sleeves, the way the child sat at the outer edge of the seat like a bird perched on a wire. She had bent down once, asked gently, "Honey, you want something else? We got peach pie fresh today." Warren had intercepted before Maya could respond. She is just shy, picky eater. You know how little girls can be. He had smiled. Jolene had smiled back. She had moved on to the next table. Now she walked to booth 8. She stood beside Grizzly. I saw it too. The bruises, the sleeves, the way she did not eat. I saw it and I did not do anything. But I am doing something now. She pulled her phone from her apron pocket and dialed 911. Earl Coggins had been sitting at counter stool number 3 for the past 40 minutes. He was 61 years old, a retired postal carrier. 3 weeks ago, he had been sitting at the same stool when Maya's sleeve had slipped. He had seen the rope burn in the mirror behind the counter, a pale line circling a thin wrist. The reflection lasted 2 seconds. He had gripped his coffee mug. He had looked away. He had told himself the things that people tell themselves when the cost of action feels higher than the cost of silence. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe I am seeing things. Maybe it is not my business. 3 Sundays, 3 chances. 3 times Earl Coggins had walked past a child who was signaling for help, and 3 times he had chosen the comfortable interpretation. Now he approached Grizzly slowly, like a man walking toward a confession. I saw it. 3 weeks ago. I was here. Her sleeve slipped. I saw the mark on her wrist. I saw it, and I did not do anything. His hands were shaking. I told myself maybe it was an accident. Maybe it was not my business. She was at that booth for 3 more Sundays. 3 more chances. And I walked past her every time. Grizzly's voice was quiet. Not absolution, just truth. You are saying something now. Is it enough? It will be when you tell the police exactly what you just told me. The first cruiser arrived 14 minutes after Jolene's call. Potter County Sheriff's Department. Lights spinning but no siren. Deputy Wade Simmons stepped out of the first vehicle. He was 51 years old, 19 years on the force. Warren Braddock's neighbor since 1997. He looked at the 45 motorcycles filling the parking lot. He looked at the diner. His face told the story before his mouth could form the words. This was not a situation he had prepared for. The second cruiser carried Sergeant Ruth Morrow, 43 years old, 12 years on the force. No relationship to Warren Braddock, no shared property lines, no barbecue invitations, no unspoken agreements. Morrow walked past Simmons without pausing, straight to the diner door. She walked to booth 7, looked at Maya's wrists where the rope burns were still visible, looked at the untouched food, looked at Warren. Sir, I need you to step outside with me. I want my lawyer, Warren said. That is your right. Step outside. He stood slowly, but when he looked toward the door, toward the 45 men in leather vests standing in the parking lot with their arms crossed, the calculation he had relied on for 9 years collapsed. There was no charm that could manage 45 witnesses. There was no smile warm enough to melt the evidence that was already being documented, photographed, and preserved. He walked outside. Inside the diner, Grizzly finally released Maya's hand, because medic had arrived. Will Garrison, 50 years old, former Army combat medic, certified EMT, and paramedic for 17 years. He knelt beside the booth, made himself small, made his voice gentle. Hey Maya, my name is Medic. I am a medical professional like Grizzly. I would like to check you over. Make sure you are okay. Is that all right? Maya looked at Grizzly. Grizzly nodded. Maya whispered, okay. Medic worked with efficient precision. Pulse, breathing rate, pupil response. When he pulled a portable scale from his kit and asked Maya to step on it, the number made his jaw tighten. 41 pounds. He wrote it down. Then he gently rolled up her sleeves. Rope burns on both wrists, a bruise on her upper arm. 4 days old, the shape and dimensions consistent with an adult male handprint. A second bruise at the base of her neck, older, nearly healed. His voice when he spoke to Sergeant Morrow had gone very quiet. This child is severely malnourished. She needs a hospital. Now. The ambulance arrived 18 minutes later. EMTs loaded Maya onto a gurney. Medic stayed beside her the entire time, one hand on her shoulder, murmuring reassurances she had not heard from any adult in 11 months. Grizzly watched from the diner doorway as the ambulance pulled out onto Old Route 60. Maya's face was visible through the rear window. Small, pale, looking back at him. He lifted one hand, a gesture that contained everything he could not say at that distance. I am not done yet. The ambulance disappeared around the bend. What happened next was not what anyone expected. Not the violence that the leather vests and the engine noise might have promised. What happened next was something the Potter County Sheriff's Department would later describe as the most organized civilian intervention in department history. Reaper walked to the center of the parking lot, raised one hand. Every conversation stopped. Here is what is happening. His voice carried without being raised. Ironside, you are coordinating with law enforcement. Make sure they have everything they need. Ridge takes 6 brothers to the Braddock property. Document everything. Photographs, video timestamps. Do not enter the barn until police arrive. Do not touch anything. We are witnesses, not vigilantes. Sparrow, you are on evidence preservation. Jolene, we need that placemat sealed. Chain of custody starts now. Ironside pulled his phone. 21 years as a homicide detective had given him encyclopedic knowledge of jurisdictional procedure. Captain Hargrove, it is Ironside. We have a situation. Child abuse, multiple victims, possible homicide connection. Rusty Spur Diner. Old Route 60. Ridge called 6 names. Diesel, Gunner, Wrench, Hammer, Snake, Flint. 7 motorcycles pulled out in formation heading west toward the Braddock property. They rode in disciplined silence. Inside the diner, Jolene carefully placed the paper placemat inside a gallon-sized freezer bag from the kitchen. The cage, the 3 letters, the evidence of a 9-year-old's last desperate act. Sparrow documented the scene with methodical precision. Maya's untouched plate photographed with a ruler for scale. The booth she had occupied photographed from 3 angles. Timestamps, metadata, GPS coordinates embedded in every image file. At 3:14 in the afternoon, Ridge and his brothers arrived at Braddock Heritage Farms. A weathered wooden sign read Braddock Family Heritage Farms. Organic produce. Visitors welcome. 340 acres. Main farmhouse. White clapboard and American flags on a pole. A plaque beside the door. Potter County Foster Parent of the Year, 2021. Behind the farmhouse, 200 feet back, a livestock barn. 60 by 40 feet. Faded red paint. 1 door, a padlock hung from the latch. Stanley brand. 4-inch hardened steel. Ridge pulled his phone. Started recording. 3:14 p.m., Sunday, August 27th. 7 witnesses present at Braddock Family Heritage Farms. We are documenting the exterior. We have not entered any structures. We have not touched any evidence. He walked toward the barn, slow, deliberate. The camera captured everything. The padlock, the door, the absence of windows, the faded red paint peeling away in long strips. He stopped 10 feet from the door. This is Ridge, Hell's Angels Panhandle chapter. There are children inside the structure. We are waiting for law enforcement before entry. If you can hear me, help is coming. You are going to be safe. Silence. 3 seconds. 4, 5. Then a voice. Small, frightened. Is Maya okay? Ridge's throat tightened. The question was not about safety. It was about loyalty, the particular bond that forms between children who suffer together. Maya is safe. She is at the hospital. And in about 20 minutes, you will be too. 2 cruisers arrived at 3:33. Sergeant Morrow and Captain Dale Hargrove, 48, 22 years, on the force head of the county's Special Victims Unit. Ridge met them. Captain, we have documented the exterior. Have not entered. There are children inside, at least 4. Who has the key? Lorraine Braddock. She is in custody at the Rusty Spur. 15 minutes later, a cruiser brought Lorraine, hands cuffed behind her back, face blank. Mrs. Braddock, I need the key to that padlock. Silence. You can give me the key or I will have bolt cutters here in 10 minutes. Your choice. Front right pocket, barely audible. An officer retrieved the key, small, brass, on a red plastic lanyard. Hargrove walked to the barn door, inserted the key, turned it. The padlock opened with a click that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. He pulled the door open. Sunlight poured into a space that had not seen natural light with the door open in 11 months. The light fell across the packed dirt floor, the metal cots, the laminated chore schedule, the leather crop hanging from a peg. 5 children, ages 6 to 11, blinking against the light. Elias, 8 years old. Enimo. He raised one hand to shield his eyes. Sophie, 6, crying silently, tears running down her face without sound. Marcus and David, twins, holding hands. And Becca, 10, red hair, scar on her chin, standing at the front. You said Maya is safe. She is safe. And now you are too. Becca's knees buckled. Ridge caught her, knelt down to her level. What is your name, Becca? Becca, I am Ridge. These are my brothers. We are going to make sure nothing bad happens to you again. Can you tell me the names of the others? That is Elias. That is Sophie. That is Marcus and David. They are brothers. Medic appeared in the doorway, trauma kit in hand. He assessed each child. Elias, 39 pounds, age 8, expected weight 57. Sophie, 31 pounds, age 6, expected weight 46. Marcus, 44 pounds, age 10, expected weight 68. David, 43 pounds, age 11, expected weight 71. Becca, 48 pounds, age 10, expected weight 66. 5 children. Collective weight deficit 107 pounds. They all need hospitalization, severe malnutrition, possible dehydration, signs of vitamin deficiency in at least 3. This is not neglect. This is starvation. Becca was the last to leave for the ambulance. She stopped at the door, turned back to Ridge. There is something else, in the barn, under my cot. A plastic bag, inside folded papers. Becca's handwriting. Dates, times, descriptions. A log. 7 months of observations written by a 10-year-old in careful print by the light of a 40-watt bulb. March 3rd, no food for Maya today. Warren said she did not earn it. March 17th. Lorraine tied Elias to his cot. He tried to go to the bathroom at night. April 2nd. Warren on the phone again. Talking about money, said the word policy 3 times. May 8th. The social worker came. Patricia. Warren moved the cots to the shed. Made us practice answers. Maya showed Patricia her wrists. Patricia wrote something down and left. Nothing happened. June 12th. Warren said Tommy's name on the phone, said same process. I do not know what that means, but it scares me. Hargrove read the pages in silence. This is evidence. This child kept a record. Ridge looked at the pages. 7 months. A 10-year-old had built line by line the case that every adult in the system had failed to build. At the chapter clubhouse, the evidence was assembling itself into a picture that grew darker with every piece. Sparrow had recovered deleted text messages from Warren's phone. The device's backup cache preserved fragments of conversations that Warren had believed were gone forever. The thread was between Warren and an unsaved number. Dated 9 days prior. Warren still on schedule. October works. Unknown policy clear. Warren 378. Same process as before. Unknown squared away. Warren handled. Sparrow ran the unsaved number through a cross-reference database. The billing pattern the cell tower pings pointed toward First Baptist Church of Canyon. Pastor Greer's office. Ironside pulled the life insurance policy on Maya Whitfield. $378,000. Lone Star Mutual Life Insurance. Taken out 8 weeks after Maya's placement. Beneficiary Warren A. Braddock. Contestability period 12 months. Expiration October 14th. The date circled on Warren's calendar. Then the deeper layer. Tommy Slade's death certificate. Filed October 18th, 2021. Age 6. Cause of death, cardiac arrest, secondary to severe dehydration and pneumonia. Natural causes. Investigating Officer Deputy Wade Simmons. A life insurance policy on Tommy Slade. Same company. Lone Star Mutual. $156,000. Taken out 7 weeks after placement. Beneficiary Warren A. Braddock. Contestability expired September 2021. Tommy died October. 9 weeks after the policy cleared. The room went silent. Elder spoke first. He has done this before, and he was going to do it again. Ironside pulled another file. Tommy's Aunt Grace Slade had filed a formal inquiry with State DFPS in November 2021. Requested re-examination of the death. The inquiry was referred to Judge Franklin Holcomb, Family Court. Holcomb sealed the case within 48 hours. Grace received a cease and desist letter 2 weeks later. The inquiry was closed. Sparrow pulled the connections. Judge Holcomb and Warren served on the Amarillo Area Food Bank Board together. Same Rotary Club. Holcomb presided over 4 placement continuation hearings for the Braddocks over 9 years. Average court time per hearing 11 minutes. This is not one-man, Ridge said. This is infrastructure. At 5:14, Ironside and Chains, the chapter's legal specialist and a retired family court judge from Lubbock, arrived unannounced at First Baptist Church of Canyon. Pastor Greer answered the door with a warm smile. Gentlemen, how can I help you? We would like to talk about Warren Braddock. The warmth flickered. We found a text thread on Warren's phone. Your number came up, squared away. Want to explain that? Greer's smile faded. 3 months ago, Maya Whitfield placed a note in your church collection basket. It read, "Please help us. We live on the farm. You found it. You called Warren. Want to tell us what happened next? She was a troubled child." Warren explained she had behavioral issues. So you destroyed the note. Silence. And you provided written character references for Warren in 3 separate CPS placement renewals. Warren is a man of faith, a respected member of this congregation. I had no reason to doubt him. A 9-year-old girl asked you for help. Ironside's voice was quiet. She put a note in a collection basket in your church in a place she had been taught was safe. And you called the man she was asking to be saved from. And then you vouched for him. 3 times. Greer sank into his chair. I did not know. I swear I did not know. You did not want to know, Chain said, because knowing would have required you to do something. And doing something would have meant admitting you had been wrong about Warren Braddock for 10 years. Now you tell us everything. Every character reference, every conversation, every time you chose Warren's reputation over a child's safety. And then you pray the prosecutor sees cooperation as a mitigating factor. At 5:52, Special Agent Catherine Stokes pulled into the clubhouse parking lot. 41 years old, 18 months into a multi-state foster care fraud investigation. She had built a financial trail connecting 3 separate placement operations across Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. Insurance fraud, federal benefits fraud, DFPS documentation fraud. The architecture of a system designed to convert vulnerable children into revenue streams. But she had hit a wall. No witnesses willing to testify. No hard evidence linking financial patterns to specific abuse. Then her phone had rung. Agent Stokes, this is Jace Colton. Hell's Angels Panhandle chapter. We just pulled 5 children out of a barn. The placement operator has deleted texts referencing a life insurance policy, a previous victim, and a name you might recognize. Judge Franklin Holcomb. Reaper met her at the clubhouse door. She was not what the brothers expected. No suit, no federal bearing, just a woman in practical clothes carrying a laptop case and the exhausted look of someone who had been chasing something for longer than she wanted to admit. I am told you have evidence. We do. But first, how long has your office known about Warren Braddock? We flagged his financial patterns 6 months ago. We have been building the case carefully, by the book. How many children were in that barn while you built your case? The room went silent. Stokes had no good answer. She did not try to give one. You are right, and if I could go back and move faster, I would. But I cannot. What I can do is make sure Warren Braddock and everyone who enabled him never do this again. Reaper studied her. He was not looking for warmth or sympathy. He was looking for capability. He found it. Show her what we found. Sparrow laid out everything. The phone, the texts, the policies, the calendar, Becca's log, Tommy's death certificate, the connections to Holcomb, Greer, Fenn, Simmons. Stokes reviewed each item. Her expression shifted as the pieces assembled. This fills a gap we have not been able to close for 18 months. We had the financial trail. We did not have direct evidence linking Warren to premeditation. This gives us premeditation. This gives us a prior victim. This gives us a conspiracy. What do you need from us? Full cooperation, witness statements, chain of custody documentation. And one condition, Maya gets a victim advocate assigned before her first interview. Same for the other 5. Nobody talks to those kids without an advocate present. Done. After Stokes left, Elder looked at Reaper. You trust her? I trust that she needs this case as much as we need justice. That is enough. The full scope was assembled in the war room that evening. Reaper stood at the head of the table. 7 children, 6 living, 1 dead. Tommy Slade, 6 years old, buried in Canyon Municipal Cemetery. His death ruled natural causes by a doctor who had never examined him while alive, and a deputy who never exited his vehicle. Financial extraction totaling $690,000 over 22 months. Life insurance, foster care stipends, federal benefits, a network. Warren at the center, Lorraine managing operations, Patricia Fenn filing false reports, Judge Holcomb sealing inconvenient cases, Deputy Simmons declining to investigate, Pastor Greer destroying evidence and providing character references. This was not just Warren. This was everyone who made Warren possible. Every person who signed a form or sealed a file or drove to an access road and stayed in their car. Every person who chose the comfortable answer over the difficult question. Every person who looked at the information in front of them and decided it meant something other than what it meant. And it is going to end, not with fists, not with anger, with evidence, with testimony, with the weight of truth assembled by people who refused to look away. At Amarillo General Hospital, the pediatric wing had gone quiet. Visiting hours had ended an hour ago, but no one had asked Grizzly to leave. The nurses had learned within the first 30 minutes that the large man in the leather vest sitting beside bed 4 was not going to be moved by policy or protocol or gentle suggestion. Maya's medical assessment had been completed. The numbers told the same story. Weight 41 pounds, 23 below expected. Blood pressure 88/52, dangerously low. Hemoglobin 9.2 grams per deciliter. Severe anemia, vitamin D undetectable. 11 months in a barn with no windows. The pediatric nutritionist had explained the refeeding protocol. Maya could not eat freely. Her body had adapted to starvation, had recalibrated its systems to function on minimal input. The sudden introduction of normal calories could trigger refeeding syndrome, a potentially fatal cascade of metabolic disruption. Slow, careful, small amounts, frequent intervals. The body had to remember how to eat the way a person held underwater had to remember how to breathe. Maya had listened. She had nodded. She had not complained. Because slow was a concept she understood. She had been starving slowly for 11 months. She could heal slowly too. Grizzly watched her sleep, the rise and fall of her chest, the IV line delivering fluids her body had been crying out for since March. The hospital bracelet on her wrist so thin the plastic band hung loose at its smallest setting. His phone buzzed, a text from Reaper. All 5 kids stable. Hospital keeping them 72 hours minimum. CPS has emergency custody. Braddock denied bail. FBI taking over. You did good, brother. Grizzly typed back one word. Maya, she asked for you. Nurse said you have not left. Grizzly looked at the sleeping child. Her hand had found his at some point in the last hour. Small fingers wrapped around his thumb. He was not leaving. Outside the window, somewhere in a holding cell at the Potter County Sheriff's Department, Warren Braddock was sitting on a metal bench. For the first time in 9 years, the door he was behind was locked from the outside. The emergency custody hearing took place on a Tuesday morning. Judge Patricia Hammond presided. 62 years old, 28 years on the bench. Assistant District Attorney Michael Garrett presented the evidence. Photographs of the barn, the padlock, the cots, the chore schedule, the crop. Medical reports on all 6 children. Warren's calendar, the insurance policies. The deleted text, Tommy Slade's death certificate, Becca's handwritten log. When Garrett finished, Judge Hammond removed her glasses. Emergency custody is granted to the state. Warren and Lorraine Braddock are prohibited from any contact with the minor children. Bail is denied pending psychiatric evaluation and flight risk assessment. She looked at Warren. Mr. Braddock, I have sat on this bench for 28 years. I have seen neglect. I have seen cruelty. What you did to these children was industrial. You built a machine designed to extract money from human suffering. You calibrated food rations to maintain compliance without sustaining health. You took out life insurance policies on children placed in your care and created the conditions under which those policies would pay out. And when one child died, you did not stop. You refined your process and started again. Warren's attorney began to rise. Hammond raised one hand. Save it for trial. This hearing is concluded. The gavel fell. In the weeks that followed, the machinery of justice moved with a particular momentum of a system that has finally been pointed in the right direction. Agent Stokes assembled the federal case. Witness statements from every brother present. Chain of custody documentation for every piece of evidence. Becca's log authenticated by a forensic document examiner. Patricia Fenn was suspended. Her case files audited. In Maya's file wrote Burns documented as self-inflicted. A $50 gift card from the Braddocks logged in her personal records 3 weeks after the case was closed. Judge Holcomb was referred to the Texas State Commission on Judicial Conduct. His sealed order on the Tommy Slade case was unsealed by a federal magistrate. The filing had been initiated not by a victim advocate, but by Warren's attorney. The judge who was supposed to protect the child had protected the man who killed him. Deputy Simmons resigned before internal affairs could conclude. His file contained 2 anonymous complaints about the Braddock property, both logged as resolved after drive-by checks during which Simmons never left his vehicle. The complaints had been filed by Grace Slade Tommy's aunt. Pastor Greer cooperated fully. He provided copies of the 3 character references he had written for Warren. He confirmed under oath that he had found Maya's note, called Warren immediately, and accepted Warren's explanation without contacting authorities. The note had been destroyed. A child's handwritten plea for help placed in a collection basket in a house of worship torn up and thrown away. Criminal charges were filed. Child endangerment, 6 counts. Felony child abuse, 6 counts. Imprisonment of a minor, 5 counts. Insurance fraud, 2 counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, 1 count. Negligent homicide in the death of Tommy Slade, 1 count. Federal benefits fraud ongoing. Obstruction of justice pending. Co-conspirator charges for Lorraine Greer Fenn and Holcomb pending grand jury review. Warren's attorney filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that evidence collected by the Hells Angels constituted an illegal search. The motion was denied. The judge noted the brothers had not entered the barn, had not touched evidence, had not conducted searches. They had observed, documented, and reported. They had done exactly what the law asked private citizens to do. The distinction mattered. Discipline was more powerful than rage. Procedure, followed correctly by people who understood its purpose, accomplished what anger never could. The trial began on a Monday in January, 4 months after the rescue. The courtroom was full, every seat occupied. Brothers from the Panhandle chapter filled the back 3 rows wearing pressed shirts over their club cuts, their presence a statement that required no words. Bonnie sat in the second row with Diane Prescott. Agent Stokes sat at the prosecution's table beside Michael Garrett. Warren Braddock entered the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit and shackles. He had lost 20 pounds since August. His face, which had spent 9 years performing warmth and confidence and the particular kind of trustworthiness that made people hand their most vulnerable possessions, their children, into his care, had collapsed into something harder and smaller. The charm was gone. Without it, what remained was ordinary, unremarkable. The face of a man who could walk through any parking lot in America without being noticed. That was the thing about predators. They did not look like the monsters in children's stories. They looked like everyone else. That was their advantage. That was their weapon. The ability to pass through the world wearing a face that generated trust instead of suspicion, a smile that opened doors instead of closing them, a handshake that felt like welcome instead of warning. Garrett's opening statement lasted 45 minutes. He did not raise his voice once. He did not need to. The evidence spoke in a language that did not require volume. He walked the jury through the timeline. Tommy Slade's placement in January 2021. The insurance policy taken out 7 weeks later. Tommy's death in October, 9 weeks after the contestability period expired. Maya's placement in September 2022. Her policy taken out 8 weeks later. The calendar notation for October 14th. The deleted text. The barn. The padlock. The children. He called Grizzly as his first witness. Grizzly walked to the stand, took the oath, and sat in the witness chair, with the particular stillness of a man who had testified in military courts and understood that the most effective testimony was delivered without performance. "Tell us what happened on August 27th. Grizzly told them. The newspaper, the peripheral assessment, the long sleeves, the rope burn, the untouched food, the placemat, the cane, the 3 letters, the whisper of a child who had used language as a last resource. He locks us in at night. The jury listened. 12 people. Ordinary citizens from Potter County and the surrounding area. Teachers, mechanics, a retired nurse, a grocery store manager. People who had never been inside a courtroom for anything more dramatic than a traffic dispute. People who were now being asked to look at evidence of systematic child abuse and make a judgment that would define the rest of Warren Braddock's life. Garrett called medic, the medical testimony, the weights, the hemoglobin levels, the vitamin deficiencies, the rope burns, the bruises, the clinical language of suffering translated into numbers that could not be argued with because numbers did not perform, did not charm, did not smile. They simply were. He called Becca. The 10-year-old girl who had kept a 7-month log under her cot walked to the witness stand wearing a blue dress that Bonnie had bought for the occasion and carrying a composure that no 10-year-old should have needed to possess. She testified about the barn, The food rations, the chore schedule, the night Tommy stopped breathing. She testified about the morning Warren came with a flashlight and took Tommy's body, and they never saw him again. The defense attorney cross-examined her carefully, gently, because he understood that aggressive questioning of a child abuse victim in front of a jury was not legal strategy, but career suicide. He suggested that Becca's memory might be unreliable, that the log might have been influenced by trauma, that children sometimes misunderstand what they see and hear. Becca looked at him with the steady gaze of a child who had spent 7 months documenting exactly what she saw and heard, because she understood at an age when most children were documenting their homework that the adults responsible for seeing and hearing were not doing their jobs. I wrote down what happened on the day it happened. I wrote the date. I wrote the time. I wrote exactly what I saw and what I heard. My memory is not the problem. The problem is that nobody asked me. The courtroom was silent. The defense attorney had no follow-up. Garrett called Jolene. She testified about the near miss, about the long sleeves and the untouched food, and the questions she had asked, and the answer Warren had given, and the way she had accepted it and moved on. Her hands shook while she spoke. Her voice did not. He called Earl Coggins. Earl testified about the rope burn in the mirror, about the 3 Sundays, about the choice he had made and the weight he had carried. His testimony was not legally necessary. The evidence was already overwhelming. But Garrett had included it for a specific reason, because the story of Maya Whitfield was not just about the people who had harmed her or the people who had saved her. It was about the people in between, the ones who saw and did nothing, the ones who carried the weight of that nothing for weeks and months and years, the ones whose silence was not malice but ordinary human reluctance, the reluctance to be wrong, to cause trouble, to insert oneself into someone else's story. Earl's testimony was a mirror held up to every person in that courtroom, and what it reflected was the uncomfortable truth that the distance between the man who looked away and the man who answered was not a canyon. It was a step, a single step. And most people, when faced with that step, chose not to take it. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They returned with guilty verdicts on all counts. Warren Braddock was sentenced to 47 years without the possibility of parole. Lorraine Braddock received 22 years. Patricia Fenn received 8 years for obstruction and filing false reports. Judge Holcomb was removed from the bench and charged with obstruction of justice. Deputy Simmons, who had resigned, was charged with dereliction of duty and conspiracy to obstruct. Pastor Greer received a suspended sentence in exchange for his cooperation, though the congregation of First Baptist Church of Canyon voted unanimously to remove him from his position 3 days after the verdict. Grace Slade, Tommy's aunt, was in the courtroom when the verdict was read. She had driven 400 miles from her home in East Texas. She had spent 2 years fighting to get answers about her nephew's death, fighting against sealed files and cease and desist letters, in a system that had treated her inquiries as an inconvenience rather than a legitimate demand for accountability. When the foreman read the guilty verdict on the negligent homicide charge, the charge that said Tommy Slade's death was not an accident, but the result of deliberate calculated deprivation by a man who had taken out an insurance policy on a 6-year-old boy and then starved him until his body could no longer sustain itself, Grace closed her eyes. She did not cry. She did not speak. She simply sat in the courtroom with her eyes closed and allowed herself, for the first time in 2 years, to stop fighting. Ironside found her in the hallway afterward. He introduced himself. Former homicide detective. He told her that her complaints, the anonymous reports she had filed, the inquiries she had submitted, had been part of the evidence trail that ultimately connected to the larger investigation. That her refusal to stop asking questions, even when the system told her to stop, had contributed to the case that brought Warren Braddock down. Grace looked at him, the face of a woman who had spent 2 years being told that her nephew's death was natural, and her grief was irrational, and her questions were unwelcome. "They told me I was making trouble," she said. "They told me to let it go, that Tommy was at peace." "Tommy is at peace," Ironside said, "and the man who put him there is going to spend the rest of his life in a cell." Grace nodded. Then she asked the question that had been living inside her for 2 years. "Did he suffer?" Ironside did not lie. "Yes, but he is not suffering now. And because of you, because you would not stop asking, 5 other children are alive today who would not be if you had let it go." Grace Slade drove 400 miles home that evening. She did not listen to the radio. She did not stop for food. She drove through the dark Texas landscape with the windows down and the night air moving through the car, and she thought about a 6-year-old boy who had been afraid of the dark and who had needed in a barn at 2 in the morning, while 5 other children listened to his breathing stop. She thought about the sealed file and the cease and desist letter, and the 2 years she had spent being told by the system that her grief was not enough reason to ask questions. She thought about the word justice and what it meant, and whether it was enough, and whether anything could ever be enough when the thing that was lost was a child who should have been safe and was not. She arrived home at midnight. She sat in her driveway for 10 minutes. Then she went inside, sat at her kitchen table, and wrote a letter to Maya Whitfield. She had never met Maya. She did not know what Maya looked like, or what her voice sounded like, or whether she liked strawberries or peach pie. But she knew that Maya had done something that Grace had been unable to do. Maya had gotten through. Maya had found someone who listened. Maya had accomplished with a broken red crayon and 8 seconds of borrowed time what Grace's formal inquiries and legal filings and 2 years of persistent demands had failed to accomplish. The letter was 3 pages long. It said, "Thank you." It said, "Tommy would have been proud." It said that what Maya did in that diner was the bravest thing Grace had ever heard of, and that the world owed her a debt it could never repay. Maya received the letter 2 weeks later. She read it at the kitchen table in the Oakwood house, with Bonnie sitting beside her. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully, put it in the drawer of her nightstand beside Grizzly's phone number and the broken red crayon she had kept, and said one sentence: "I wish I could have saved him too." The children healed, not quickly, not easily, not in the linear progressive fashion that recovery narratives prefer, where each day is better than the last and the arc bends inevitably toward wholeness. They healed the way real people heal, in stutters and setbacks and small victories that were invisible to anyone not paying close attention. CPS had initially placed the 6 children in separate emergency foster homes. That arrangement lasted 4 days. On the 4th night, Diane Prescott, the CPS supervisor who had taken over the case, called Reaper. "The children are asking for each other. They have been through this together. Separating them is causing additional trauma. Then keep them together. Potter County does not have a facility that can accommodate 6 children in a single placement. Group homes are at capacity. Standard foster placements, except 2, occasionally 3. Reaper was quiet for 3 seconds. "What if we found a place?" The house at 147 Oakwood Lane had belonged to a brother named Colt. Passed away 2 years earlier. Cancer. Quick and merciless. His widow Bonnie had kept the house but could not bring herself to live in it alone. The rooms were full of Colt's presence, his books on the shelves, his jacket on the hook by the door, the particular configuration of a life that had been interrupted mid-sentence. Bonnie had been waiting for a reason to fill those rooms again. She just had not known what the reason would look like. When Reaper called her, she did not hesitate. Bring them home. The chapter spent a week preparing the house. New beds, fresh paint in soft blues and warm yellows, colors chosen by Sparrow's girlfriend, who taught kindergarten, and understood that the colors children woke up to shaped the way they experienced the day. Nothing institutional, nothing that resembled a barn, a refrigerator stocked with food labeled with each child's name, because ownership mattered. Because knowing that a container on a shelf had your name on it and would still have your name on it tomorrow and the day after meant that the scarcity was over, that the rationing had ended, that food was no longer a weapon but a right. A pantry with a lock that did not work. Deliberately broken, visibly broken, so the children could see that there was food behind the door and understand in the specific way that traumatized children needed to understand things through physical evidence, rather than verbal promises that they would never again be locked away from what they needed to survive. Before the children arrived, Reaper gathered the chapter at the house one last time. "When they get here, we step back. This is their home now, not ours. We are not saviors. We are not heroes. We are the people who showed up. And showing up means knowing when to be present and when to make room." On September 18th, a CPS van pulled up to 147 Oakwood Lane. 6 children stepped out. Diane Prescott walked them to the front door. Bonnie opened it. "Welcome home." Maya stood in the doorway. She looked at the living room, the couch, the television, the bookshelf filled with books that were not laminated chore schedules, but actual stories, actual worlds, actual escapes that did not require a broken red crayon in 8 seconds of borrowed time. She looked at Bonnie. Is this ours? It is yours. All of you, for as long as you need it. Maya walked inside. Slowly, she touched the couch the way a person touches something they suspect might disappear if they apply too much pressure. Testing reality, confirming solidity, learning through her fingertips that this object existed in 3 dimensions and would continue to exist after she removed her hand. Becca followed, then the twins, then Elias. Then Sophie clutching her one-eared rabbit, looking around the room with the wide eyes of a child who has just been told that the world contains rooms that are not locked from the outside. Diane Prescott handed Bonnie a folder. Emergency placement paperwork. Approved for 6 months, renewable. She paused in the doorway. Bonnie, I have been doing this work for 19 years. I have never seen a community show up for children the way yours has. Bonnie's eyes were damp. They are family now. That is what family does. The first safe meal happened 6 days later. The chapter transformed the clubhouse into something it had never been. A family dinner space. Long tables borrowed from the VFW hall. Paper plates. Plastic forks. And food. Not from a restaurant. From the brothers' kitchens. Ridge's wife had made 3 pans of lasagna. Enough to feed 50 people because she understood that abundance was a message that the sight of more food than anyone could eat was itself a form of healing for children who had spent 11 months counting ounces. Ironside's partner brought cornbread. Sparrow's mother, a small woman in her 70s, who treated every brother in the chapter like an overgrown grandson in need of feeding, had baked 3 pies. Peach, apple, cherry. Maya sat between Grizzly and Elder, Becca beside her, the twins across the table. Elias and Sophie at the end, flanked by Medic and Chains. 6 children, 17 brothers, 3 wives, 2 girlfriends, Sparrow's mother, Bonnie. A family that had not existed 4 weeks ago, assembled around borrowed tables in a converted warehouse eating lasagna off paper plates and discovering that the definition of family had less to do with blood than with choice. Maya stared at her plate. Lasagna, garlic bread, green beans. More food than she had seen on a single plate in 11 months. She looked at Grizzly. Can I really eat all of this? You can eat as much or as little as you want. And if you want more, there is more. And if you want to save some for later, we will wrap it up for you. Nobody is taking your plate away. Not now, not ever. Maya's hand shook as she picked up the fork. She took 1 bite, chewed slowly. The room had not gone silent. The brothers were talking, laughing, passing dishes. They were not watching Maya. They were being present. And the difference between watching and being present was the difference between observation and safety. She took another bite, and then for the first time in 11 months, Maya Whitfield ate a full meal without counting the minutes until someone took it away. Sparrow's mother brought out the pies. Maya chose peach. The smell, sweet cinnamon, warm crust, was the same smell that had hung in the Rusty Spur diner on the day her life changed direction. She had not recognized it then as the smell of safety. She recognized it now. The following week, the brothers said their goodbyes. Not goodbye forever. Goodbye to the emergency phase. The crisis was over. The children were housed, fed, enrolled in school therapy, scheduled medical care ongoing. Ironside knelt in front of Elias at the kitchen table. He pulled a card from his vest pocket, wrote his phone number in block letters. Elias, you have my number. You need anything help with homework, someone to talk to, anything you call me. Day or night, understand? Elias looked at the card, then at Ironside, then quietly in the voice of a boy who had not spoken voluntarily in 6 months. Thank you. First words he had spoken in weeks. Ironside's jaw tightened. He nodded, once stood, and walked to the porch before anyone could see his eyes. Sparrow sat with Becca at the kitchen table and showed her a phone. Prepaid, simple, loaded with every brother's number. 1 button sends a message to all of us at once. You feel scared, unsafe, anything. You press it. We come. Always. What if it is not an emergency? What if I just want to talk? Then you press it anyway. There is no such thing as bothering us. Grizzly stood on the porch with Maya. The sun was setting orange and pink across the panhandle sky. The kind of sunset that happened in places where the horizon was wide enough to hold the full weight of the light. You are going to be okay. You and the others. You are going to have nightmares. You are going to have hard days. You are going to have moments when the barn feels closer than this porch. But you are going to heal because you are not in that barn anymore, and you never will be again. Maya looked up at him. Will you come back? I will come back every Sunday. Same as the diner, except now I am coming here. She reached for his hand. He gave it to her, the same hand she had reached for in booth 7, but different now. Not the desperate hold of a child grasping at the only solid thing in a dissolving world. The steady hold of a child who had found her footing. Grizzly. Yeah, little one, I'm glad I gave you the paper. His throat tightened. Me too. Elder was the last to leave. He stood in the doorway looking at the 6 children in the living room. Sophie curled up on the couch with her rabbit. The twins playing cards at the coffee table, arguing about rules in the quiet, comfortable way that brothers argue when they feel safe enough to disagree. Elias reading a book Chains had given him. Becca helping Maya set the table for dinner, placing forks and knives with the careful attention of someone learning that ordinary tasks performed in safe spaces could be pleasurable instead of mandatory. Elder had been riding with the Hells Angels for 46 years. He had seen every version of good and evil the American highway could produce. But these 6 children, this house, this moment was what it was all for. He looked at Bonnie. You call if you need anything. I will. He walked to his bike, started the engine, and as he pulled out onto Oakwood Lane, he thought about Tommy Slade, the 6-year-old who did not make it, the child they did not reach in time. This one is for you, kid. Grizzly did not plan to be at the Oakwood house on the night of October 14th. The date had been circled on Warren Braddock's calendar, the notation beside it. No contest period expired. October 14th was the date the life insurance policy's contestability period expired. October 14th was the date after which Warren could have collected $378,000 if Maya Whitfield had died under circumstances that appeared natural. October 14th was the date Warren had planned for Maya to stop breathing. Grizzly found himself in Bonnie's driveway at 9:43 that evening. He had not planned to come. He had told himself the date was just a number that Warren was in a cell and the danger had passed and Maya was safe. But his body had driven here without consulting his mind. The knowledge that October 14th was not just a date, it was a threshold. The edge of a cliff Maya had been walking toward for 11 months without knowing it, pushed by hands that smiled while they pushed. Through the living room window, he could see her. Maya was on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching a movie with Becca, a bowl of popcorn in her lap. She was eating the popcorn one piece at a time, slowly savoring each kernel the way a person savors something they have learned not to take for granted. She weighed 44 pounds now, 3 pounds heavier than the day he met her. Still too thin, still healing, but healing, alive. He stood in the driveway for a long time. The sound of crickets, the warm October night, the distant hum of highway traffic, the ordinary sounds of a world that had continued turning while a 9-year-old girl fought for her life with a broken crayon and a 5-minute window in the particular courage of someone who had nothing left to lose. He thought about every person who had failed Maya before he met her, the pastor who destroyed her note, the caseworker who filed her rope burns as self-harm, the deputy who never left his cruiser, the judge who sealed a dead child's file, Earl Coggins at the counter who saw the mark and looked away. And he thought about the ones who had not failed her. Jolene who sealed the placemat and dialed 911. Earl who walked into the sheriff's department 3 days later and confessed everything. Becca who kept a 7-month log under her cot. Ridge who stood outside a locked barn and told 5 children help was coming and meant it. The difference between the two groups was not intelligence, not courage, not resources, just a choice. The choice to let what they saw mean what it meant. Months passed. The healing continued in the quiet, unglamorous way that real healing happens, through therapy sessions that were sometimes productive and sometimes not, through school days that were sometimes good and sometimes terrible, through nightmares that came less frequently but never entirely stopped. Maya's weight climbed, 44, 48, 52. Each pound was a small victory measured by Medic during bi-weekly check-ins. One Tuesday morning in November, Maya stood in the hallway of Oakwood Elementary School, staring at a bulletin board. Student council elections. Her name was on the ballot. Fifth grade representative. She had not planned to run, but her teacher, Miss Rodriguez, had pulled her aside 3 weeks earlier. You have a story that matters, Maya, and when you are ready to tell it, people will listen. Maya had not told her story publicly. Not yet. But running for student council felt like a first step towards something. Toward believing that the voice that had been silent for 11 months was worth hearing. Toward understanding that the girl who had calculated 5-minute windows and bet her life on a stranger in a leather vest was not just a survivor. She was someone with something to say. She won. 43 votes. She stood in front of the bulletin board the next morning looking at her name. Becca walked up beside her, grinned. Told you that you would win. I did not think anyone would vote for me. Why not? You are the kid who took down a predator with a crayon. That is the most incredible thing anyone at this school has ever done. Maya laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was unexpected and bright. It was the first time Becca had heard it in 14 months. It was the sound of a girl learning that joy was not dangerous. That laughter was not a sound that needed to be muffled. That being heard was not the same as being punished. Elias began speaking again. Not much, not often, but words returned to him cautiously, one at a time, testing whether it was safe. His first full sentence spoken to Ironside during a homework session at the kitchen table was, I do not understand fractions. Ironside, who had spent 21 years as a homicide detective and had interrogated men who committed acts of violence that would keep most people awake for the rest of their lives, sat at that kitchen table and explained fractions to an 8-year-old boy with the patient thoroughness of a man who understood that this right here, this moment of ordinary difficulty, was what safety looked like. Sophie stopped crying at night, not all at once, gradually. The silent tears that had soaked her rabbit's remaining ear every night for 11 months became less frequent, then occasional, then rare. She still held the rabbit when she slept. She would hold it for years. But the tears dried, replaced by the deep, still breathing of a child who had learned that the sounds she made in the dark would not be punished. The twins of Marcus and David discovered basketball. A hoop appeared on the Oakwood house garage one afternoon, installed by 3 brothers who spent 2 hours arguing about regulation height. The argument was settled by Bonnie, who walked outside with a lemonade and told them to set it at 8 feet and stop making noise because Sophie was napping. They set it at 8 feet. Becca became Maya's closest friend. They shared a room at the Oakwood house, their beds separated by a nightstand that held a lamp, a stack of library books, and a framed photograph of all 6 children taken on their first day of school. In the photograph, they are standing on the front porch, backpacks on shoes that fit clothes the right size, looking at the camera, with expressions ranging from cautious optimism to outright terror. Maya was smiling, small, uncertain, but real. There were setbacks. Nights when Maya woke screaming, the barn closing in from all sides, the sound of Warren's boots on gravel, the click of the padlock. Mornings when she could not eat because her body remembered hunger as a permanent state, and food felt like a trick, something offered to be taken away. Days when she sat at her school desk and could not hear the teacher because a louder voice was playing in her head, the flat, measured tone of a man who never raised his voice, but made every word feel like a locked door. The worst night came in late October, 3 weeks after the move to Oakwood Lane. Maya woke at 2 in the morning, drenched in sweat, her heart hammering against ribs that were still too visible beneath her skin. In the dream, she had been back in the barn. The padlock was clicking shut. Warren's boots were crunching across gravel, and when she looked down at her hands, the broken red crayon was gone. She had no tool, no plan, no window. Just darkness and the sound of 5 children breathing, and the knowledge that no one was coming because the man in booth 8 had not been there that Sunday. The booth had been empty. She sat up in bed. The room was dark. The shapes were unfamiliar. For 3 full seconds, Maya did not know where she was. Her body had been trained over 11 months to wake into danger. The absence of danger felt like a malfunction. Her brain searched for the familiar coordinates of suffering, a metal cot, the barn walls, the sound of Sophie crying into her rabbit, and found none of them. Instead, there was a soft mattress, clean sheets, a nightstand with a lamp, and Becca sleeping in the bed beside hers, breathing deeply, peacefully, the breathing of a child who had learned faster than Maya to trust the safety of this room. Maya did not scream again. She sat in the dark and counted her breaths the way Dr. Whitmore had taught her. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. The counting was a bridge between the barn she had left and the room she was in. A way of translating the language of her body, which still spoke fluently in fear, into the language of the present, which was trying to teach her a different vocabulary. After 10 minutes, she got up, walked to the kitchen. The house was quiet. The hallway light was on because Bonnie left it on every night, a small, deliberate gesture that said this house does not go completely dark. Maya opened the pantry door. The lock was broken, deliberately broken. She looked at the food on the shelves. Cereal, crackers, peanut butter, canned soup. Her name on a container of trail mix that Medic had recommended for between meal snacks. She did not take anything. She just looked, stood in front of the open pantry and looked at food that was hers and was not going to be taken away and was not conditional on completing a chore schedule or earning Warren's approval. She stood there for 5 minutes looking at the shelves the way a prisoner looks at an open door, testing whether walking through it would trigger a consequence. Then she closed the pantry door, walked back to her room, got into bed, and slept. She told Dr. Whitmore about it at their next session. The nightmare, the pantry, the 5 minutes of standing and looking and not taking. Dr. Whitmore listened. Then she said something that Maya would remember for the rest of her life. You did not need the food, Maya. You needed the proof. You needed to see with your own eyes at 2 in the morning that the pantry was still there, and the food was still there, and the door was still unlocked. You were not checking for food. You were checking for safety. Maya considered this. Will I always need to check for a while? Yes. And then less. And then one day you will walk past the pantry at 2 in the morning and not even think about opening it. And that day you will know that your body has finally learned what your mind already knows, that you are safe. Bonnie learned to sit with her on the hard mornings, not talking, not asking what was wrong, just present. A cup of hot chocolate placed on the table, a blanket draped over her shoulders, the quiet, persistent message that this house was not a barn, that these adults were not Warren, that the food on the table would still be there when she was ready to eat it. Maya's first voluntary request came 6 weeks into therapy. She asked Bonnie if she could have strawberries. The question was so small, so ordinary, that Bonnie almost missed the magnitude of it. A child who had been denied food for 11 months, who had been taught that asking for anything was a risk that carried consequences, had just asked for something she wanted. Not needed, wanted. Bonnie drove to the grocery store that afternoon and bought 3 pounds of strawberry ones. She put them in a bowl on the kitchen counter with Maya's name on it. Maya ate 4 that evening. She ate 3 more the next morning. She did not eat them all at once because she was still learning that abundance was not temporary. But she ate them, and each one was a small, quiet victory over 11 months of calculated deprivation. 3 days later, Bonnie found a drawing on the kitchen counter. Maya had made it with colored pencils from a set Sparrow had given her. It was a bowl of strawberries. Red, bright. Below the drawing in Maya's careful print, 2 words. Thank you. Bonnie put the drawing on the refrigerator. It stayed there for years next to school art projects and report cards and photographs from birthday parties, becoming part of the ordinary landscape of a home where children were fed and safe and growing. But Bonnie never moved it because she understood that the drawing was not about strawberries. It was about a child learning to want. And wanting was the beginning of everything. 3 years later, Maya Whitfield was 12 years old when she walked into the Rusty Spur diner for the first time since the day she slid a placemat across 4 feet of linoleum and bet her life on a stranger. She was with Bonnie. Sunday lunch, a weekly tradition. Jolene was still the waitress. She looked up when they walked in, recognized Maya instantly. Her eyes filled. Hey, sweetheart. Hi, Jolene. They sat in booth 7, the same booth. Maya ordered a cheeseburger, fries, and peach pie for dessert. She ate every bite. The meal took 40 minutes. She did not count the minutes. She did not calculate the window between one adult leaving and another returning. She just ate. Afterward, Jolene brought the check, set it down, hesitated. Maya, there is something I need to tell you. I have been carrying it for 3 years. Maya looked up. I saw you that day, before Grizzly did. I saw the long sleeves. I saw that you were not eating. I asked if you wanted something else, and Warren answered for you. And I let him. I walked away. I could have done more. I could have pushed. I could have called someone right then, and I did not. Jolene's voice cracked. Maya was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took Jolene's hand. You called 911. You sealed the placemat. You testified in court. You did more than most people ever do. But I should have done it sooner. You did enough. Maya's voice was steady. You were the second person who helped save my life. Grizzly was the first. You were the second, and I am here because of both of you, Jolene cried at the table, openly. And Maya held her hand and understood something that 3 years of therapy and safety and people who stayed had taught her. That forgiveness was not about erasing what happened. It was about recognizing that most people were not villains or heroes. They were just people. And sometimes people got a second chance to choose better. And what mattered was not whether they had hesitated, but whether in the end they had moved. 1 month later, Maya was invited to speak at a Potter County CPS training session. 47 caseworkers, social workers, foster care coordinators, the people who held children's lives in manila folders and 30-minute home visits. Maya stood at the front of the room. She was 12 years old. She was 61 pounds. She was wearing jeans that fit, in a purple shirt, and shoes that did not cut her ankles. She was speaking voluntarily, which was something she had not done for 11 months of her life. She told them about the barn, the padlock, the rope burns, the 40-watt bulb, the chore schedule, the food rations measured in ounces instead of meals. She told them about Tommy Slade, the boy she never met, whose death she overheard on a phone call, and whose name she carried like a stone in her chest. She told them about the 3 people who had tried to help before Grizzly, the pastor who called Warren, the caseworker who filed her injuries as self-harm, the deputy who never left his car. And then she said something that would be quoted in CPS training materials for the next decade. You have the power to save lives or to file paperwork, and sometimes those feel like the same thing, but they are not. The difference is whether you believe the child in front of you or the adult who has had more time to practice their story. Silence. The particular silence of a room full of people who have just been told something they already knew but had not been willing to hear. Then one caseworker in the back row stood, started clapping, then another, then all 47. Maya stood at the podium for a moment after the applause faded. She looked at the room full of adults, people with power, people with files and clipboards and the authority to open doors or close them. She thought about Patricia Fenn, who had looked at her rope burns and written self-inflicted. She thought about Diane Prescott, who had walked into the Oakwood house and immediately understood that separating 6 traumatized children would cause more harm than any protocol was worth. 2 caseworkers, 2 choices. The difference was not training or experience. It was the willingness to be inconvenienced by the truth. Maya stepped away from the podium. Diane Prescott was waiting in the hallway. How do you feel? I feel like Tommy would be proud. Diane's eyes filled. She did not wipe them. I think so too. That same week, the Panhandle chapter held its annual fundraiser. The goal seed money for a new initiative called Angels Watch, a Hells Angels foster care monitoring program. Volunteer brothers vetted and trained conducting informal wellness checks on foster placements, not replacing CPS, not circumventing the system, adding to it. An additional layer of eyes that could not be managed or charmed or filed away. Reaper stood at the podium. We cannot save every child, but we can make it harder for the next Warren Braddock to operate in silence. We can be the people who do not look away. By the end of the night, the chapter raised $19,200. 3 other Texas chapters voted to adopt the model. Within a year, Angels Watch would be operating in 11 counties. Grizzly still went to the Rusty Spur every Sunday. Same booth, same order. Black coffee, chicken fried steak, peach pie to go. He had not missed a single Sunday in 3 years. Not when the Panhandle winter turned Old Route 60 into a strip of black ice. Not when the July heat made the asphalt soft enough to leave boot prints. Not when his left knee, the one that had taken shrapnel in Fallujah and never fully forgiven him for it, ached so badly he had to grip the handlebars with both hands just to keep the bike steady. He came because ritual mattered, because the Sunday visit to the Rusty Spur had become the structure around which his week organized itself, the fixed point that gave everything else its coordinates. And because every Sunday when he sat in booth 8 and looked across 4 feet of linoleum at the empty booth 7, he remembered. He remembered a whisper, a placemat, a small hand in his, and he renewed the promise he had made in that moment. The promise that he would not look away, that he would not stop seeing, that he would remain present in the ordinary moments where the things that mattered most were hiding in plain sight. But now every time he sat down, his eyes went to the small frame mounted beside the register. A paper placemat, a cage drawn in red crayon, 3 letters, SOS. Jolene had framed it 6 months after the trial. No placard, no explanation. The regulars knew. New customers sometimes asked. Jolene always answered the same way. A little girl left it here. She is okay now. Grizzly looked at it for a long time today. 3 years. 3 years since a 9-year-old's last desperate act had landed in exactly the right place, at exactly the right moment, in the hands of exactly the right person. 3 years since a broken red crayon had done what 3 CPS investigations, 2 anonymous complaints, a sheriff's wellness check, and a collection basket plea had failed to do. His phone buzzed, a text from Maya, "Movie night at the house tonight, you coming?" He smiled. Typed back, "Would not miss it." He paid his tab, left a 20 on a $14 check. Same as always, walked to his bike, started the engine. And as he pulled out onto Old Route 60, heading toward Oakwood Lane, heading toward a house full of children who had survived, and a woman named Bonnie who had opened her door without hesitation, and a room where popcorn was being made, and a movie was being chosen, and the biggest argument of the evening would be about whether to watch something funny or something with superheroes. He thought about something Elder had said once sitting on the clubhouse porch watching the sun go down over the panhandle. You do not measure a life by the mistakes you did not make. You measure it by the moments you chose to show up when it would have been easier to look away. Grizzly had spent 22 years as a combat medic. He had saved 31 lives under fire. He had earned medals and commendations. But the moment he was proudest of, the moment that defined the man he had become, was a Sunday afternoon in a roadside diner when a 9-year-old girl slid a placemat across 4 feet of floor, and he looked at what she had drawn and decided it meant exactly what it said. A call for help, not ignored, not filed away, not explained, answered.